So we're going to have a brief history of Impressionism, and the technology we're using today is in part compliments of Kansas Creative Arts Industry. They provided a partial grant for us, so we thank them. And we have Dave Stewart is going to be doing a hands-on after I get done with the PowerPoint. My name is Ruth, and I'll be doing a little history here, and we'll just be cruising right along. Okay, now most of you know it's a French Impressionism is a style from 1860 to 1926. The main artists were Edward Manet, although Manet was considered not an impressionist. He was they considered him their leader. And later, after he died, Monet took over as the leader. But Manet was older, and he was actually kind of prominent a little bit. He had gotten things in the Salon of Paris, which was the big place that everybody wanted to get their stuff into. And so they all kind of followed him. But these were the main artists here. Claude Monet, he was the one that lasted the longest. So he became the leader. Alfred Sisley, Berthe Morisot. And it was interesting because the Impressionists actually had women. And that was kind of unheard of back then. Because Berthe Morisot was one of them. So was Mary Cassatt later. Camille Pissarro, Renoir, Bazille. Bazille died in the war, so not too many people talk about him. But he had some really cool stuff. And then later on it was Edgar Degas, because he was also older. And Paul Cézanne, who also was older. But their whole idea was to capture the moment in time, the way the light looked and the atmosphere, and the way the light affected color and shape. And that was their whole deal. Okay. They didn't call themselves the Impressionists for a long time. They had, I think, 3, 4 shows where they didn't call themselves the Impressionists. On the 3rd show, or the 4th show, they finally got the title. Before that, they were calling themselves the Independents. And at one point, they were calling themselves the Nouveau Artists. And this is one of Monet's paintings. Yeah. And so he's trying to capture the effect of light and color on the train station. And there's Edward Manet. He was their inspiration. And I don't have any of his paintings up here, but he did some pretty radical stuff, considering. He did the Picnic on the Grass. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it has 2 men eating and then a nude sitting in the middle of them. It caused quite a stir back in Paris, and he submitted it to the Salon, and they rejected it and said that it was obscene. And it made him very angry because he was thinking that the Salon was dictating what artistic style was, which they were. The Salon was this big building, and it had paintings from floor to ceiling, and the ceilings were at least 2 stories tall. And if you were an artist in Paris and you wanted to make any money, you had to get your stuff in the Salon, because the Salon was where all the rich people went and all the patrons went. So they would come into the Salon and they would pick out your work and say, I'll take that painting and I'll take this painting and that sculpture over there. And that was the way it worked. If you didn't get in the Salon, you didn't make any money. And so it was a big deal for them to try to get into the Salon. But also the Salon was a bunch of old guys that looked at art a certain way and only accepted certain things. Now, if they really liked your work, they would hang it at eye level in the place. And if they didn't like your work, or they thought you were new, or they thought your stuff was just okay, they might hang it all the way up toward the ceiling, didn't matter what size it was, or all the way down by the floor. So the people on eye level, they were the, quote unquote artists, famous artists. So Manet was in the Salon on and off, But he was angry at the salon, and so that was one of the things that inspired Monet and the rest of the group, is because he was, saying, this isn't right. They shouldn't be dictating. We should rebel. Although he really never rebelled. And he never called himself an impressionist either. He said, no, I'm a modernist. Because what he was doing was, he was kind of a crossover. He was kind of the missing link between old style and new. Okay, now, the first show they had was in 1874, where they got to be called, after it, they got to be called the Impressionists. And they were having these shows at this photographer's studio, Felix Nadar. And they were having them because they couldn't have the salon. They couldn't get in. So they were doing the Salon du Rejects. Salon du Rejects. The rejects from the salon is what it was called. And so on the third one, I think it was the third one, or the fourth one, one of the critics, and they were inviting everybody. They were trying to get, they were inviting the poor people, the rich people, which was unheard of, to invite the poor people like us. We would have been poor people. And they invited them all to come and look, and the art critics. And they came, and they looked, nobody bought, and they left. And then this guy, not him, but Louis Leroy, he was a famous art critic. He wrote in the newspaper that it was a terrible show. And the worst artist of them all was Claude Monet. And the worst painting that was there was this one, and I'm going to show it to you bigger, because he said it's called Impression Sunrise. These guys don't know what they're doing. Their painting is sloppy, their brushstrokes show, that's, the colors are too bright, and they're just giving you the impression that they're artists. And this is what, I wrote down what he said. He accused the group of painting nothing but impressions, that it wasn't real art. And so they kind of liked the title. They read it in the paper. It kind of made them mad. But at the same time, they said, well, Impressionists, that's exactly what we're doing. We're capturing a moment in time. That's what we want. So they kept it. And here's the painting that caused all the stir. And it's fairly abstract. For the time, it was pretty revolutionary, because, you just didn't have no details. That just wasn't it. So that's the one that gave him the title. Okay. Now, there was lots of reasons why Impressionists came about. Not just because they were young and they were rebellious. And they all were young. They were I think Monet was the oldest when he took over as being the leader, and he took over when he was 20. So they were all in their teens. So they were rebellious, They're teenagers.
By nature.
But there was, besides the fact that they were being rebellious, other things were going on in the world. Art was changing. And it had to change because of what was going on. Anybody know? Anybody know what was going on? I'll give you a hint. Okay. There were some new discoveries in science. Anybody know what they were? Oh, come on.
Steam engine?
No, but that's a good one. That one, although they did like painting. Okay, well,
The planets?
the physics of light. Although they knew that the rainbow came from light, they finally figured out that, all the colors were in the white light, and that the prism was just separating them out. And so therefore the artists were like, well, then if the light changes, then so does the color, because the color's coming from the light. And so they said, all right, well, so if it's 2 o'clock, the light is going to look one way. When it's 5 o'clock, it's going to change, and the colors are going to change, which is true. And that's the way it works. So that was one thing. Okay, there was also some new inventions. Anybody know this one? Come on. Besides the steam engine.
Telescope?
Camera.
Ding, 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 winner. So, yeah, the camera was 1816, and about the time that they were painting, cameras had gotten affordable for people to purchase. And quite a few of them bought cameras. And the camera caused some problems though, because, oh, I forgot, there's one more. Paint in the tube. Paint in the tube was a big deal, because before they had paint in the tube, they had to do everything in the studio, because they had to grind the pigments and add the oil and grind the pigments and add the oil, and that's how they made their paint. And you kind of can't take a big stone out with you, and they could scrape up some and put it in and take it out, but it was a mess. They didn't want to do it. So paint in a tube made it so they could go out. They could do plein air. They could go, anywhere they wanted to, and they'd have all their colors with them. So that was also, that was revolutionary. It changed a lot of it. Okay, and then the other thing the camera caused was all of a sudden everybody had cameras, and they were saying, oh, I want a picture of Jay. Click. They weren't hiring Dave to paint it anymore, because Dave might take 6 weeks to paint it. And the camera was like, click, done, here we go. You can have it back in a couple days. And so people were not paying the artists. The artists were starting to be starving, because they weren't getting hired, except for the really well-known portrait artists would get hired every once in a while. So they had to do something the camera could not do. And one thing the camera could not do at that time, anybody know?
Color.
Color. Yes. Thing. Camera was only black and white. So they had to brighten their colors. They had to do stuff the camera couldn't do. Because the camera it could capture the moment in time, hence also what they were doing. But it couldn't capture the color. And it couldn't capture, it could capture most of the atmosphere, but if the atmosphere was being created by the light changes, it couldn't really capture the colors. And so that made a big difference. They had to, because they wanted to make money. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, is to make some money. Okay, so here they are capturing what now Degas. He came along a little bit later because he was older. He had a camera, and you could tell he had a camera. If you look at these, notice where's my lovely stick? Notice the horse cut off. Okay, that's camera. And any self-respecting artist at the time would not cut off anything. And the arrangement, it's over here, it's not smack in the middle. Cut off, all these people cut off over here, and you can't really tell what's going on. And he was obviously overhead taking that picture. So yeah, although he, to his dying day, said they never used his photos with his paintings. I think he lied. Because he has too many like this. He has lots and lots of them. See, now here's another one of his. Over here, you can see again, she's cut off. I don't know if you guys can see that very well.
That's how the sunlight's coming
Yeah, well, it's probably too reflective. So yeah, so the camera, and a lot of them had cameras, and they were, out there taking pictures and everything, but they wanted to make money. Okay, so then here's Claude, and he became their leader. Manet died, and although he did show with them a couple times before they were called the Impressionists, he never showed with them when they were called Impressionists, which was kind of a shame, because his stuff was really very impressionistic. So anyway, Claude took over because he was the oldest, and he was also the one of the purists about the whole thing. And there's one of his little statements. He painted plein air outside, and he felt like that was the best thing you should do, is be outside. So I don't know if you guys want me to leave that for a second if you've read it. Okay, now he did go to art school, and so did quite a few of the other ones. He didn't really care much for art school, which was interesting, because most of the famous artists didn't really care much for art school, but they went. And he mostly liked the art of other artists, like Manet and people like that. And he would rather go sit in their studio and ask them questions and learn from them than go to formal classes. But he did. I mean, he did go to classes. His paintings, he tried very hard to get into the salon, and he was very upset that he did not. He got in a couple times, but the paintings were small and didn't sell for much. And he was very poor. And if he hadn't lived as long as he did, he would have remained poor, because pretty much all the Impressionists were poor all the way until he died. Because like anything else that's new in the art world, people don't accept it for a long time. And they took them a really long time. I mean, it was in the 20s, 1920s, before France even started, claiming them as their own, which was a shame. I mean, this stuff's beautiful. So he did get a few in and into the salon, but people like us, poor people, we were buying their stuff, not for a lot of money, but that was pretty much the only money they were making. And here's another one. He did a lot of plein air, like I said. He used really bright colors, pure colors. He was very spontaneous, fast brushstrokes. They worked fast because they were outside. And well, he knows if you're outside, anything can happen,
Yeah.
All of a sudden clouds come over and it's raining on you. So, yeah, so he worked fast, and he pretty much did all outdoor painting. He did some in studio, but not much. And here's his first wife, Camille. She was a model for him, and then they got married, and that's his oldest son, Jean, right there. And Camille died fairly young. They had two sons, Jean and Michel, and she died of, it was tuberculosis, and it was also malnutrition, because they had no money. And at one point in time, they were literally dying. And if it hadn't been for Degas kept stealing food from his parents. Degas' parents had a lot of money, and he'd go on the weekends and eat Sunday dinner with them, and afterwards he'd take all the leftovers over to the Monets, because they were starving, because he couldn't sell anything. But like I said, he used broad strokes. He was fast. He didn't rework his stuff. He went with it just the way it was. Okay, now he was one, which I think he might have been the only one, that did series paintings of the same thing at different times of the day, different times of the year. And this is just one of the water. I think this one's in a river, but he does Giverny, where he lived out the rest of his life. He did water lilies, haystacks, the Rouen Cathedral, the Parliament. He went to London for a while during the war and did quite a few of the Parliament. But he's trying to capture the atmosphere. Unfortunately, I don't know. I think all I see is pixels up here, so I'm hoping it looks better from over there. Here's the Rouen Cathedral. Different times of the day, different years. Haystacks. I love the haystacks. Mm-hmm. If you ever get a chance to see a bunch of the haystack paintings, there's some in the Art Institute in Chicago, and they like flicker. I can't even explain it, but they look like they flicker.
Wow.
And his work is so spectacular. I've seen quite a lot of his stuff, and that retrospective that I went to in St. Louis in, it was 1974 or 5, they had a whole bunch of his haystacks. And I mean, you just looked at them and you're like, well, how is it doing that? I mean, it really looked like they flickered. It was the coolest thing. And so he did lots of haystacks. And like I said, he created the mood in his paintings with the light. And he used pure colors. He rarely, if ever, used black. He said black is not a natural color because it's not in the spectrum of light. Black is the absence of light. So he didn't use black. I think if he used it, he mixed, primary black himself. But he never used straight black out of a tube. But he used all the other colors straight out of the tube. And again, if you ever get to see a lot of the water lilies, they're just so serene. In fact, that was the reason I became an art teacher. Is one of the water lily paintings. If you've been to the St. Louis Art Museum. Have you seen the giant water lily painting? Sure. Okay, well that's one of 3 paintings that go together. They put them all together at the Nelson. When I was 5 years old, we took a field trip there, and we walked past that giant painting, and it didn't look like anything to me because, we were this close. Yeah. There was little splotches of paint, and I remember thinking, oh, little splotches of color, isn't this nice? And as we were leaving the room, I turned around and looked back and saw, and I thought, there's a pond. Where did that come from? And so I walked back in. Of course, everybody else went on. I got in big trouble for that, but I went back in and I walked up to it and I went, oh, it's just splotches. That was the splotchy painting. Where'd the other one go? Because it disappeared. And then I walked away and it reappeared. I said, this is magic. How's this doing this? And then, of course, teacher came back, the art teacher happened to be with us. And she was like, where have you been? We're at the bus, And I said, this painting, it's nothing. And then you come back here, it's a pond, it's something. How does it do that? And she said, that's Water Lilies by Claude Monet. You become an artist, you'll be able to do that too. Let's go. And I said, okay, I'll do that.
Just easy.
Yeah. Well, and I went home that night and told my mom, I said,
Still waiting for you.
I know what I'm going to be. I said, I'm going to be an artist. And she said, okay, good. And I said, where's some paper? I got to get it going here. And so that's how I ended up being an artist, was because of that. So you never know what's going to affect you. Yeah, there's another one. This one's interesting because I saw this print of this at one of the doctor's offices, and it was upside down. and the signature was up there, and it was upside down. And I said to the lady, I said to the lady that was behind the desk, I said, that painting's upside down. And she said, how do you know? She said, the trees should be at the bottom. And I said, those are reflections. And she said, how do you know? I said, I'm an art teacher. And I said, also, signature's upside down. And she was like, oh, I guess we need to turn that around. I think it's still like that. I think it's still upside down. Welcome. Now, Monet was renting a farm out in Giverny for years. And finally, after so many years of him finally making a little money, he bought the farm. And he started turning it into gardens. He had ponds dug. He had this Japanese bridge brought over from Japan. And he basically turned it into his own canvas of living things, because he said he always wanted something to paint. And that way he always had something to paint, because he could go to different ponds, he had gardens everywhere, and his house was on there, and it was just always beautiful. Now, he did series paintings at the farm, and the way he would do the series paintings, like this one, there's a whole bunch of these bridge ones, he would dig a trench, and he'd have a pulley, and he'd have, because these are big, some of these are really big, and he'd have the canvas down in the ground, and he'd put a tarp over it, and at 10 o'clock, he'd go to the 10 o'clock canvas and crank it up and paint until the light changed, and then he'd crank it down and go to the 12 o'clock canvas down the road. And he'd have as many as 8 going at a time. And he did his entire studio walls where he put canvas on them, and he had water lilies going all the way around, and he actually sold the walls to the lingerie, but he wouldn't give them to them because they made him mad. And he told them that if they wanted the paintings, they had already paid for them, and if they wanted the paintings, that they could have it after he was dead. And so then they got it after he was dead. And so if you go to Paris and you go to the Orangerie, they've got the walls from his studio. But yeah, he would do that with the water lilies, with the bridges. He'd set it up like that, and he'd do multiple paintings at a time. And the last 43 years of his life, he never really left the farm. He just painted what he had there. And he also started developing cataracts. And they got really bad, and back then they didn't take them off, like they did mine. But he pretty much was going blind. So as time went on, the older he got, and he lived a long time. He went through 3 wives. So he lived a long time. And he was like 84, 85 when he died. But in his 80s, he was still painting, but everything was very abstract because he couldn't do tight details and he couldn't see them anyway. So some of them, like this, the colors are more muddy and the shapes are less, are kind of just blobs. And he was trying to go for a little more detail, but not much. But Impressionism didn't really lend itself to tight details anyway. So, you know, if you're losing your eyesight, it's okay. It's out of focus. It's all right. Because, you know, that's part of the process. But in 1926, when he finally died, he was making a lot of money. He was famous at that point. People actually were doing films. I've seen several little films that have actually of him painting, cranking up things up and doing the whole deal. So, you know, he didn't last long enough. The other ones, not so much. They kind of died penniless or close to it. So, all right, anybody have questions? You girls, I'm sorry you missed the beginning part. Okay. All right, so Impressionism, there's more than just art. Okay, it wasn't limited to visual art. Over time, it has gotten into film. It's gotten into music, which is what's playing. That's Impressionist music by Debussy. And it also got into literature. And if you ever saw the movie The Beauty and the Beast by Jean Cousteau, it's silent, fabulous movie. And it's all Impressionist. Or if you've ever seen Room with a View, that movie, they recreate one Impressionist painting after another in those. They have several Monets, they have a couple of Degas, a couple of Renoirs that they recreated for the time period. And it's very, very cool. The literature, there's quite a few different people that write impressionistic literature. So it's not just for art. Questions? Okay. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And Dave is going to be doing a little Impressionist painting, or you can do chalk. We have chalk and painting both. So you'll get to choose which one you would like to try out, or both. Okay, well, thank you. And
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that.
Very good.
Okay.
Can we turn those lights on?
Yeah, now you can turn the lights on.